the richest Americans have steadily taken a bigger share of the country's income. Now, the wealthiest 10% make more than half of all income in the United States. And it hasn't always been this way. Just take a look at this chart. For decades, what you are seeing there in the 50s through the 70s, in those years, the rich earned about 30-some-odd% of the nation's income. But now the income share of the richest 10% is the highest that it's been in at least 100 years. Joining the table now is Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League and former mayor of my city, New Orleans. Joel Berg, the Executive Director of the New York City Coalition Against Hunger. And Avik Roy, a Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Avik, is there any reasonable, either ethical or empirical economic reason that 6 people should have a wealth that is that much more than everybody else? Like just that number alone, does that simply, is there some way to explain that and that it makes sense?
Yeah, so I mean, let me go back to the original question you asked, which is this empirical or is this philosophical?
Right.
And it's both. So there's a dispute between liberals and conservative progressives and conservatives about what the solution is. Conservatives would say that it's economic growth and private sector activity and employment. And then there is a disagreement also about the philosophy, which is to say that where conservatives are, they say, and they don't always live up to this and address it with as much vigor as they should. But what they say is, we should have equality of opportunity. The result is up to you. But the real issue is, let's make sure that the opportunities are equal. And we can have a debate about what equality of opportunity means, but that's fairly different from the idea that, well, income inequality, as it is obviously always wrong. In America, we generally don't have a problem with, say, Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs getting rich because we feel like we're benefiting from it. The cost of our lives goes down when technological innovation or other innovations. The fact that Walmart is so successful means that a lot of people can buy goods that are really inexpensive. That makes their lives better.
So it's interesting because actually what you've laid out there, although I may have some real disagreements with it, I actually think that those are relatively consensus positions. Joel, is the thing that we mostly need is for our government to get out of the way?
No. If we did, there would be no public roads or public sidewalks for Senator Paul to even get to that event. The problem is that we've replaced opportunity capitalism with crony capitalism. Look, my grandparents came here with the hope that they could build a better life for themselves and their grandchildren, and they knew if they worked hard and played by the rules, by and large, they could get ahead. The real engine of economic opportunity is hope, and we've demolished hope in America, and we have less upward mobility than virtually every one of our serious economic competitors.
Look, that point, Avik, just feels hard to deny that we are not the country that we once were, that we have a American myth about economic mobility, that economic mobility has dissipated, and it has dissipated at the same time that corporate profits have increased dramatically. Why would we need more corporate profiteering, lower taxes, and less government investment?
So I think also there's a consensus position around the fact that the government should be involved in building roads and post offices. Nobody's objecting to that, right?
Well, some of the libertarians are.
No, I mean, not really. I mean, like, if the only thing the government did was build highways, I think libertarians like Rand Paul would be very happy, right? But that's not the only thing the government does. That's a fraction of the federal budget.
That's why we can't get a transportation bill passed. I mean,
the reason
is that traditionally, I think he's correct in this sense. That's traditionally been the position, I think, of a lot of mainstream conservatives, but what I've seen is a departure from the idea that we held in this country, that it was a combination of government and the private sector, not government versus government against. And we had a debate about the degree, the extent, the roles, the responsibilities. I see a different kind of debate where either the government is all friend or all foe, or the private sector is all friend and all foe. And I just tend to reject, that point of view, because that point of view is not the kind of point of view that helped us achieve a greater degree of economic mobility, a greater degree of income equality in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, as your chart mentioned.
So, Avik, is there a better balance then, this point, that there can be some balance between that conversation? Because it does feel like Paul is suggesting this massive disinvestment of the government?
I think even Rand Paul would agree that economic mobility is the priority. The question is, again, what policies will achieve economic mobility? So, and this is one thing that, to your point, I think Republican intellectuals and Republican thought leaders have long talked about the need to improve the degree to which that is the priority of Republicans. The Republican base is less passionate about that sometimes, and that's sometimes a tension between how the GOP advances these issues. But having said that, certainly among the leadership of the Republicans, among conservatives, you read National Review, you read the Wall Street Journal, there's a lot of talk about what we can do for education, for example, where we see from the conservative point of view that there's a tension in the progressive movement between teachers' unions and poor children, school choice. The Obama administration is fighting school choice in Louisiana.
Oh, no, they're not. I mean, look, come on now. You know, this is one of the places where my president and I deeply disagree, in part because they really are much more conservative than they're not. The Obama administration's education policies have not bolstered public education for the most part. They have mostly been voucher-based policies or charter schools-based policies, or what we think of as school choice policies. There's a set of conservative intellectuals and think tank folks. There's people running for office, and there's a base, right? So talk to me about the politics of what it means to be a conservative lawmaker running against the minimum wage, running against poor, like what's the political calculus that says it makes perfect sense for me to run against an increase in the minimum wage, to run on a slashing of food stamps? What are the political realities on the ground that are making conservative lawmakers think that makes sense?
Yeah, so there's shall we say, two sets of issues. So the issues where there might be tension between the base and the intellectuals, and those are things like prioritizing equality of opportunity, really focusing on things like education reform, all that sort of thing. When it comes to the minimum wage, there isn't tension between the base and the intellectuals because there's a consensus in the conservative world that the minimum wage, raising the minimum wage, is economically destructive.
Based on what?
Because, well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So to your argument, Amy, about how, well, there are these CEOs making all this money, and that's why people have low wages. Well,
no,
of course,
the taxpayers subsidize.
Right,
it's one thing if they're paying their fair taxes, these corporations, but $33 million taxpayer subsidy for the head of Yum?
But the CEO does not pay the wages of the worker at your local McDonald's. That's a franchise that's owned by a franchise owner, and that person is paying the wages.
Why should this corporation get a $33 million tax
just
rebate?
Let me try to explain how this works. So if you double the wages of a person who works at that McDonald's, then if that franchise owner doesn't have bags of money hiding behind the potato fryer, then he has to do one of two things. He has to hire less people, or he has to raise prices for consumers and pass the increased costs down.
But that franchise argument, which I actually, like, I respect the franchise argument in the sense of, for actual franchise owners, they are facing some real constraints. But that's precisely why the corporations set the process up in this way. I mean, it's not as though in order to run a McDonald's or a fast food corporation, you would necessarily have to franchise in this way. This is precisely developed so that it is the frontline sort of small business owner, McDonald's owners, operators who have to take the hit. Why not, in fact, force a new situation where the corporations at the top who are getting these enormous tax subsidies at multiple levels have to pay their workers a fair wage?
Because the result would be higher costs and less hiring. If you want to address income inequality, the way to do it is not to make it more expensive for companies to hire people. It's to actually have a direct transfer through things like the earned income tax credits.
Thank you, Avik, for being here, and I hope that you will come back. We always like to hear an economics debate between Mark Morial and Avik Roy. That's high nerdland activity.